People who live rurally. What's the scariest experience you've had that you can't explain? I was camping alone in the middle of the plains in North Dakota. A storm blew in, and I was stuck in my tent under some trees and got a super strange feeling. I had two phones on me at the time, one had internet and was for navigating, and the other was just for cell reception. 2013. All of a sudden, one of the phones started ringing, and I looked at the caller ID. The call was coming from my other phone, which was closed and in my hand. My dad used to rent this house way out in the middle of nowhere. A good 45 minutes from any town. The closest neighbor was another 15 minutes away. On this property were several enclosures for raising pheasants. These belonged to the property owner, so my dad had no responsibility towards them other than to notify the owner if he saw anything wrong. He was high school buddies with the owner, so they were on good terms. Well, one morning he notices something very wrong. In the pheasant enclosure furthest from the house were a good 50 or so birds. Every single one of them had been slaughtered overnight. What was even weirder was that it didn't seem to be an act of predation. None of the birds seemed to have been consumed. Luckily the owner had cameras and they got to see what really happened. So sometime in the middle of the night, a man neither of them recognized had wandered onto the property. He made no attempt to approach the house, but instead crawled under the enclosure's fence and proceeded to catch and stab each pheasant with a knife while wearing a headlamp. They caught the entire event on camera, from him entering the property till he left early in the morning. The police were called, but nothing ever came of it. My dad was so freaked out from the whole event that he made us stay with our mom for several weeks while he slept in bed with a gun. The property owner tightened up security with new fences and alarms. He even bought some guard dogs. They were very well trained and super friendly to anyone who'd approach them during the day. Nothing ever happened again on that farm, and the bird-killing psycho was never found. I live alone in the woods 15 minutes from my town. My neighbors are near, but not right next door. One summer morning I woke around 4:30 a.m. to a strange pounding sound. It was still kind of dusky dawn lighting, and I was in a daze from just waking up. Then I started to hear a man's voice yelling, "Somebody help me." I began to look out my windows to see if I could see anyone but couldn't from upstairs. My home has no window coverings on any windows. I went downstairs and caught a glimpse of him, naked with a thin t-shirt on, running around my house trying to jiggle windows and doors. He was very erratic, kept screaming for someone to help him, and kept running from door to window all around, trying to find a way in. In any normal situation, I would gladly help someone in need. But this situation felt too unpredictable and dangerous for me to allow this person into my home. I was able to contact my neighbors who got my MSG and quickly made their way over to help me. This is faster than any police that can get here. The guy ran away straight into the trees before they arrived. He was picked up by RCMP shortly after. No idea what happened there. My mother lives alone pretty much in the woods. Completely dark at night, no street lights or lights from neighbors, only a small road leading up to the house. One time in the middle of the night she woke up to clear footsteps on the gravel. You know the sound, and 3 knocks on the front door. She called out hello and looked outside and nothing there, only silence. It might not be a spectacular story, but I would freak out if it was me waking up to that in the middle of the night with no other people around. I grew up on a small property in regional Australia. We lived about 3 to 4 kilometers out of town, so not super far, but also far enough that we never really get disturbed. On top of that, we were on a dead-end street, down the end of another street off of the main road, so not once have I ever seen a pedestrian near my house. Anyway, one night when I was about 12, I was watching TV when 2 of my brothers came downstairs and said, "Did you hear that?" I was pretty glued to the TV so didn't hear a thing, but apparently they heard footsteps outside and a couple of hushed voices. Seeing as how my brothers were both around 20 and both big rugby-playing dudes, their plan was for me to wait inside while they ran outside and tackled anybody they could find before calling the cops. So they both sprinted out the front door at the same time, splitting in different directions, to wrap around the house and meet again on the other side, presumably each with a criminal wrapped in a headlock under their arm. If you've ever seen that movie. Signs where Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix run around the house, basically just picture that. Anyway. They never found them. Swear to this day that they heard voices, but nobody was ever seen. Our property has a lot of thick bushland right up to the house, so all we can think is that when my brothers came out, these guys just dissolved back into the bush and watched, then probably just took off once the coast was clear again. The whole thing scared the hell out of me. I grew up on a ranch, in a small old California ranch house. Lots of windows to stay cool on the summer, almost all the rooms open to the central living room. I was probably 14, my father was 11, and my mom was out that night running an errand. Brother and I are together in the living room. He's sitting by the stove and I'm lying on the sofa, we're both doing homework. Inside the lights are on, but through the windows it's pitch black. As I'm reading I hear footsteps on the mud porch leading up the front door. It's an old house, and I hear the heavy footsteps clearly. But I hadn't seen my mom's car drive in. I hadn't seen her hurt any car. It's the country, I would have heard a car approaching and seen their headlights through the dark windows. But there was nothing, just the footsteps on the porch. They stop at the front door, but no one knocks. I am frozen. If I had gotten up and looked around the corner through the kitchen, I would have seen the owner of the food steps standing at the door, which had a window. But then they would have seen me. If I talk to my brother, they'll hear me. And in the dark, anyone could be looking through the windows at us, but we couldn't see out. I go through all my options. The person is standing at the only door in or out of the house, which is always unlocked. If I go to the kitchen to grab a knife, they will see me and know I see them. We can't hide, the house is too small, and they'll see where we go. My heart is racing. My best option is to pretend I don't know for as long as I can and be ready for whatever comes next. But after a few minutes, I don't hear any more footsteps. I calm down. I might have just imagined it. 20 minutes later I hear my mom's car and see the headlights go across the windows. I run outside because I'm still a child and I want my mother to know how scared I am. But before I can tell her she asks me, "Who left the water on?" And I'm terrified again. We had this weird water spigot in the front yard with a pole that shot up to about waist height and a spigot turned up instead of down. My brother and I would treat it like a drinking fountain or turn it on full blast and play under it like a fountain. When she got home the water was on, full blast, shooting several feet up into the air. Someone had been there that night on our porch. They saw my brother and I, alone, no car in the drive. They didn't come in, but they wanted us to know they could have. Unfortunately it's hard to explain. I was hiking down a trail with my dog in remote northern Wisconsin when I just got a weird feeling. At the exact same time, the hackles on my dog went straight up and he began acting really anxious. About the same time, I came into a clearing in the woods and got hit with what I can only describe as a sound wave. It was like someone was blasting a subwoofer right next to me, but there was nothing around. The nearest road was maybe a mile away. Something told me to get the fuck out of there. So I quickly turned around and hiked as quickly as possible the rest of the way back. I didn't hear that bass sound after I left the clearing, but I still felt like something was following me. Our two normally placid black Labradors woke me up. My bedroom was on the ground floor, making an awful growly barking sound I've never heard them make with real aggression and fear in it. We lived in the countryside with a huge common and woods out the back of the house. I went into the kitchen and they were glaring at the back door and making a big fuss. This made my hair stand on end and their obvious terror communicated itself to me. I grabbed a torch and steeled myself thinking maybe it was an intruder and armed myself with a fire poker and opened the back door. It was pitch dark and as I opened the door both dogs shied away and ran out to the other room. I poked my head and the torch out the back door and just for a split second I saw reflective eyes of a really large creature somewhere up the garden maybe 10 meters away. They blinked as they turned away and they were gone. There is literally nothing in England that can account for this. I slammed the door shut in me and the dogs leapt in my bedroom half terrified. The local paper shortly after that featured an article about some unexplained sheep deaths in a farm a mile away from ours. They had been ripped to shreds as if by a large predator. One Friday this summer one of my neighbors who has no kids cleaned her storm door. She had no visitors that day. When she woke up the next morning there were what looked like 10 or 15 children-sized handprints on her storm door. She called the cops just in case there was a missing child or something and they came out to take a look. Said it could have been raccoons. Probably was, but for a while there I was genuinely freaked out. Summer 2020 I made the mistake of going out onto the porch at around 11 p.m. I was about to take the trash out to the dumpster across my backyard, but I felt something in the yard and froze. A few seconds later I heard footsteps and something moved around out there. It was not a person. I left the trash on the screened-in porch and locked the door behind me so fast. I don't go outside after dark now, if I can help it. We've recently had reports of black bears in the area, so that might have been it, but I've never seen one here in person. My wife, kids, and I live in 30 miles or so outside of town on 100 acres. The house sits a half a mile off the main road. My wife wanted the works for security when we got the place, so I did a gate, driveway, doorbell past the gate, cameras at the gate and at the house, alarm system, 2 new puppies, you name it. I've always lived way out my whole life, so I'm used to the hog squeals, coyote screams, deer huffing, all that jazz. One night around 2 a.m. I heard a loud shatter, and instantly it was covered by the alarm siren for the house. The main keypad is in our bedroom, and I look to see the glass break sensor in our son's bedroom has tripped. I, thinking the worst, grab a shotgun kept for rattlesnakes and run to his bedroom, hollering for my wife to grab our youngest from his crib just in case. I hear my oldest son screaming. I'm shaking so violently I can barely turn the doorknob. My adrenaline fight response has completely taken over. I throw the door open, let out a war cry trying to intimidate a would-be intruder, and my son is clinging to the crib rails and glass is all over the floor. I can just feel the cold winter air snapping through the room. I shut his bedroom door behind me, grab him up, and frantically check the bathroom, his closet, anywhere in the area I thought the intruder would be. I yell for my wife again. Living this far out, we have a system. If someone is ever in the house and one of us knows, but we don't want to alert the intruder, she gives a response indicating she's alone still and okay. I take my son to my wife and hand her the shotgun, telling her I'll grab the rifle and check around inside and out. I grab a flashlight and my rifle. I scan the entire house. I walk outside and hit the auto lock on the deadbolt. I quickly make my way around to the back side of the house to the busted window. My adrenaline has started coming down, and I'm logically telling myself it had to have been a deer. Right. Saw his reflection buck the window broke. That's got to be it. I checked high and low all around the house and never found any indication to what it was. I checked the cameras and couldn't find anything around the house at that time either. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. It took a few weeks for me to let my son sleep in his own bedroom again. I'm positive it was just a deer attacking his reflection. But I've always wondered if someone broke the window and heard the siren and immediately ran. Now, there was a blind spot watching that particular window. I've installed more cameras since the incident, and I have one that points down each side of the house just to watch windows and entrances. Motion sensing floodlights on all 4 corners, and my favorite, one of our pups sleeps right beside his bed every night. I lived in the country for a few years, and for the most part it was amazing. There weren't many times that odd things happened that I couldn't find a rational cause for. But the one time I can recall, it was nighttime. My mom and stepdad were out and my grandma, who lived with us, was sitting in the living room waiting for them to come home. We had the TV off and my brother wasn't home, so it was just us. There had been some fireworks lit off from a farm up the road, so it wasn't really a quiet night. But just after the fireworks died down, I heard something clinking against the gutter drain at the front corner of the house. This was followed by light tapping against the living room's exterior wall. My grandmother was a nervous sort to begin with, and she was trying to ignore the sounds, but because there had been some vandalism at another house in the area, I peered out the window into the dark to try to see if there was anything I could make out. Of course it was nothing but blackness. I decided to grab my stepdad's pistol and just make sure everything was kosher. I opened the front door and went out onto the steps so that I had a clear line of sight that way, and then stood there quietly listening for any sounds of movement. I heard nothing out of the ordinary, so I went back inside. I told Grandma it must have been an animal and put the gun back. After she went to her room, the tapping started again. I listened a few moments and then grabbed the pistol again, and this time was smart enough to grab a flashlight. As I was making my way to the door, the tapping became thumping and moved up the wall onto the roof. Now I've seen raccoons climb up walls and whatnot. This wasn't that sort of noise. These were heavier and more coordinated. As the thumping moved across the roof to the back side of the house, I decided to relatch the door lock I'd just undone and go down to my room in the basement. I went outside the following morning and didn't really find much. There were some spots near the drain where the dirt was disturbed and a mark on the wall that looked like something had hit it. But I saw nothing that could point to a culprit. Man, animal, or other, and it never happened again. I don't live in a rural setting, but I work quite a bit in rural parts of the US. I used to work as a field archaeologist and we would run across odd things out in the middle of nowhere or up on the top of a mountain or deep in a forest of swamp. Once when doing high-altitude survey work in the mountains of Colorado, we were in the middle of an alpine forest. There were 3 of us, each with their own survey line to follow parallel to one another. Every 50 meters we would dig a 50 centimeters x 50 centimeters hole and use our hand screen to screen the dirt. We would then record on a form the soil type, any artifacts, and so on. We would do this for miles, and miles for 10 hours a day, the real life of an archaeologist. So, I was on the far right survey line, and we were climbing over boulders and through trees uphill toward the ridgeline. I dropped down off of a boulder into a small opening in the boulder field, and there was an old tree that had symbols carved in the bark that I could tell had been recarved repeatedly. There was a small, but a distinct stone circle that went around the base of the tree. There were what looked like Wiccan-type wooden figures made from small twigs twisted together, and what looked like small wooden offering bowls with food and dark liquid in them. I called my survey partners over to the tree. We took photos and recorded it on a cultural site form, though it was modern. The site kind of gave me the willies since there were animal bones included in the shrine or whatever it was. I posted this somewhere before, but thought it was relevant again. When I was in college I was coming home from work around midnight. I lived in a super rural area, and my car at the time had a large moon roof. I pull up to a stop sign about a mile outside of my town. Only cornfields and soybeans surrounding me. Out of nowhere this insane bright light comes down on top of my car. Like so bright I cannot see where it's coming from when I look up. We have had Samaritan helicopters that have flown over our house with these bright spotlights before looking for a safe place to land when there was a car accident far from town and lots of snow all over, so I am looking up and trying to see if I can see the helicopter above me, but this light is so bright I can't see anything. I remember very slowly starting to make the turn from the stop sign towards town when the light took off super fast ahead of me, expanded. I can only describe this as like something you would see in a space movie and then disappeared. The next thing I knew I was crossing the bridge into town which was about a mile away from where I last remembered being. I was alive and caretaker for a 94-year-old woman with Alzheimer's for about a year and a half. She had moved into her daughter's home deep in the woods of middle of nowhere, Washington. Marie was prone to say weird things, like that her sister, deceased, mother, deceased, and husband, deceased, were in the house or outside regularly. I had been working with dementia patients for a few years by this point, so it never bothered me. Marie was terrified of the woods. She would tell me about how there's dangerous animals out there, and I could get lost easily, so I must always stay inside. She was also worried about her mother and husband having to travel through them. Again, this wasn't worrisome behavior given her health condition. I had been working with her for about 6 or 7 months when I would start waking up to her walking down the halls in the middle of the night. Sundowning is fairly normal for people with Alzheimer's, so again I wasn't troubled by this, but she started going to a specific window and giggling. Like she was interacting with someone outside the window. When asked what she was doing she'd say my mother is out there. Kind of weird, but there's a different perception in her world now. One night in dead of winter her daughter and I are woken to the blaring of the house's alarm system. The daughter and I check the doors and windows, none of which seem to be disturbed or unlocked. The only thing missing is Marie. She is nowhere in the house. Panicked, I rush outside to find her, while the daughter continues to search the house. No tracks anywhere, no disturbed snow, nothing. After 10 to 15 minutes of yelling and searching the woods I start making my way back to house, where her daughter was already in the process of calling 911. As I approach the house I see Marie. Standing outside the window she normally stood at giggling. There's not a single footstep in the snow around her, nor is she cold to the touch. She's just standing there laughing at nothing, didn't even know she was outside. Her late night window visits became more frequent after this, but less happy. She'd get combative with the window and scream at whoever she believed to be there. Then it just stopped one day. One of the last conversations I had with Marie before she passed, she told me to not let them take me into those woods. I hope they didn't. I'll start with the least paranormal. Was sitting outside goat watching. Suddenly I heard coyotes going crazy to the northeast. A constant warbly growl came from the same direction and drowned out the coyotes until the night went dead silent. I've hunted hogs, invasive bobcats, and just about everything else you can name in NA. That can be hunted, and I've never heard anything like it before or since. In my parents' house you can hear people having conversations through the walls, but when you start leaving the room you're in it stops. Everyone who visits frequently has heard this at least once. I once showered with the bathroom door open as the family was away. I heard the door open and my parents talking, laughing, putting stuff away. I hopped out to shut the door and finished up quickly to greet them, but nobody was around when I got to the kitchen. No cars, nothing had been moved or was missing, Bloodhound was undisturbed, but our small dogs were freaking out. Called my parents assuming they had just come back to get something, and they told me they were still 2 towns away. When I was young, maybe 4 or 5, my mom would often sleep in the living room with me and my 2 sisters as a family bonding thing. We were watching King of the Hill on our TV set when my mom and I heard the ferret gate at the bottom of the stairs slammed. We gave each others a quick glance and she jumped up to wake my dad up. He found nothing wrong and there's no way to escape the basement but the stairs. Those stairs are carpeted and with some testing done in the morning we found it took a lot of force to recreate that sound. I didn't experience this, but my parents tell me about it often. When my sister and I were very young. 4 halves respectively, my parents heard a loud banging on their bedroom wall. Deliberate knocking as they put it. They bolted up in bed, looked at each other, and my dad grabbed a baseball bat. Neither of us kids or the dogs we had at the time stirred at all, and they and the cops found no trace of anyone even with canines. More recently, I was around 14 and had my desktop PC in our kitchen on the table because we had no desk for my room. Late night playing video games and I hear knocking. Ignore it at first thinking it comes from the game, but it happens again and again and again. Took my headphones off and hear that it's coming from the door between the garage and our kitchen at the other end of the room. I go to the door with a kitchen knife and see nothing. The knocking has stopped and I immediately go wake up my mom. She tells me to just go to bed and rolls back over, but it happens again. Clear as day and we both heard it. She gets up to come look and still nothing there. Didn't happen again that night. My sister always said that late at night or early morning. 12:04 a.m., you could hear a woman screaming in the utility room in our parents' basement. Connected to a bed or a bath, assumed she was just making it up for shits and giggles. 4th of July last year she comes home with her son, parties, passes out in her old room downstairs. I agree to listen for her baby until I go to bed. He's down with her, so she can get some rest. Hear crying, think it's the baby, so I go downstairs and open the door to what is clearly a woman absolutely bawling her eyes out from the utility room bathroom. Sister and her son are sleeping in the main bed together and are both asleep. I immediately shut the door and run back upstairs. I sat in the kitchen and waited for it to stop. Then the baby started crying and you could immediately tell the difference between the two if you'd heard it. Thanks for watching. If you like the video please drop a like and to stay up to date with my latest videos, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the button under this video.